Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome students. I am Dr. Ankita Chaudhary, a DST Vice Scientist who is currently working at IIIT Allahabad. So in this module, you will be learning about some fundamental concepts of nanoscience and nanobiotechnology, and you will also be learning about the basic working principles of micro nanorobots or nanorobotics. So let's begin. That's the first lecture in which I'll be introducing you the basic principles of nanoscience and nanotechnology. So in this, you will be learning about the scope, the history and the significance of nanoscaled materials. So let's start with the word nano. Nano is a unit prefix meaning 1 billionth. And what does the word nano mean? It is derived from the Greek word nanos, which means dwarf or something very small. So IUPAC in 1947, it officially adopted this term, this prefix nano, to describe 1 billionth part of a unit. So nanomaterials are nothing new. They have been present in nature since the beginning of time. In meteorites, in moon dust also nanomaterials are present. Then in volcanoes, in forest fires and in sea sprays also you can find nanoparticles. They are nano-sized materials in that. And then there can be anthropogenic sources, that is in fertilizers, in automobiles, industries, cosmetics and pesticides. So in natural sources also nanomaterials are found, and in human sources also you can find nanomaterials. Although nanomaterials have been present in nature long before scientists could ever imagine them. They have already been around us all this while. So they are also present in living cells, in living our fundamental building block of life, our DNA, that is also a nanoscaled material. And then you can find in very day-to-day objects, in plants, in animals, you can find nanomaterials. So what does this picture indicate? That's your lotus leaf. So you know, water droplets on the lotus leaves, they do not stick, they just fall off, and they also roll off dirt along with that, cleaning your lotus leaf. And inspired from that, your self-cleaning surfaces are currently being made. So what is the science behind this? There are basically tiny bumps that are coated with wax crystals which make lotus leaves super hydrophobic. So these are your tiny wax crystals. These trap air into it, and which makes water roll off from here. So these are your dust particles. That's your lotus leaf surface. That's your water droplet. So it is not going to stick because of these air packets that are trapped inside these tiny wax crystals. So these nano-sized tiny wax crystals, they trap air into it. So there is trapped air over here. These are air pockets inside this. So what it will do, it will make the water droplet roll off from the surface, and your water droplet is going to roll off from the surface, collecting the dirt along with it. So it is going to clean the surface as well as roll off from the surface. So that is how your lotus leaf is a self-cleaning leaf. This is also known as lotus effect, and it is being widely used to create water-repelling self-cleaning surfaces. So people have been using nanomaterials for around 4,000 years without fully understanding the science behind them. So there have been traces of, so studies have shown that ancient Egyptians, they used lead sulfide nanoparticles to create hair dyes, and then that was around long time back. And then several ancient artifacts, they also have shown to contain nanocrystals in them. So on the left is the picture of a Lycurgus cup, which is a prized ancient artifact that is kept in the British Museum currently. So what is so special about this cup? This is a 4th century Roman glass cup, and it changes its color depending on the light source that is falling on it. So when the light is transmitted from inside, it appears red in color, and when the light is reflected from the surface, it appears green in color. So these changes are basically because of the silver and gold nanoparticles that are present inside that are embedded in the glass of this cup. So this is a glass cup, and the nanoparticles that are present in this cup, they help, they scatter light differently due to dichroism, and you see different colors depending on the light source, whether it is coming from inside, whether the light is being transmitted or the light is being reflected off from the surface. So it depends on the light coming on it. So this is a very clear picture. You can see King Lycurgus ensnared by vines. So that's a Lycurgus cup for you. And then these are the, on the right is the medieval church windows. These were the glass windows that showed very vibrant colors. So that was also because of the gold and silver nanoparticles of different shapes and sizes and different spacing that were present in these beautiful windows. So these were in stained windows. These actually had nanoparticles that reflected light differently. So the different reflection created this beautiful pattern and vibrant colors on these windows of the glass windows in the medieval churches. That's a timeline summarizing ancient civilizations. They produced and used nanomaterials without even knowing their nano-sized characteristics. So people have been using nanomaterials for such a long time and they didn't even know that these are nanomaterials. So Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago and the universe came into existence. And then 0.8 million years ago fire was discovered, and then came the cave paintings in 40,000 BC. And then nanoclays in 5000 BC. Then in 2600 BC, hair dye nanoparticles, basically lead sulfide nanoparticles, they were first discovered in the ancient Egypt, where they used lead sulfide nanoparticles to create hair dyes to dye their hair. Then synthesis of metallic nanoparticles by chemical methods in 1300 BC. Then in 4000 AC, the first synthetic pigment, Egyptian blue, that was synthesized for the first time. Now this was, what was this? This was crystalline calcium copper silicate. This was crystalline calcium copper silicate, a hybrid nanomaterial. That was the world's first synthetic pigment, blue in color. That was Egyptian blue in 400 AC. Then in 300 AC came the Lycurgus cup that I've already told you before. Then in 800 AC, Mayan blue pigment was synthesized in 800 AC. So these were also of the made up of the hybrid nanomaterials, and they showed excellent stability and vibrant colors. Then in 800 AC, decorative glazed ceramics were made. Then came 1857 AC and Faraday produced the ruby gold colloidal suspensions for the first time. He did not even know that these were nanomaterials till now. Then in 1200 AC, the famous legendary sword Damascus sabre, that was made for the first time, which was made of the nanostructured iron. This was used by medieval Muslim armies for fighting, and this was made from wood steel in India. Then came Satsuma glass in 1950, and in 1940 rubber reinforcement replacements for carbon black. So that came in 1940. So that is how the scale has continued for such a long time. So the scale is just for comparison purpose. So you can see that people have been using nanomaterials for such a long time and they did not even know that these are nanomaterials. So what do you understand by the term nanoscience? Nanoscience is the study of phenomena and materials at the nanoscale, that is 1 to 100 nanometer. So what is so special and significant about this particular scale? Like nothing bigger than this and nothing like smaller. What is so specific about this nanoscale? That is 1 to 100 nanometer. So what happens is that properties, scientists have discovered that the properties of materials start to differ very significantly from the bulk materials at this particular scale. So what nanoscience does is that it bridges the gap between physics, chemistry, biology and engineering. And the focus is on, so scientists have to focus on understanding the size dependent effects of these materials. Then what are nanomaterials? Nanomaterials having basically materials having at least one dimension in the size of 1 to 100 nanometer. These are known as nanomaterials. Materials having at least one dimension in the size of 1 to 100 nanometer range. These are known as nanomaterials. So on the right is the picture of a diameter of DNA that is in the nanometer range. So you can see that this is a naturally occurring nanoscaled material. Then On the left is the comparison between 1 rupee coin and 100 crore rupees. So you can see this difference is analogous to the difference between bulk materials and nanomaterials. So you can compare this with bulk materials and nanomaterials by comparing this 1 rupee coin and 100 crore rupees. So what is nanotechnology? It is a application of nanoscale knowledge for practical use. It deals with the design and manipulation of nanomaterials, and it includes materials, devices and biological systems at nanoscale. So it transforms fundamental science into some real world applications. So that's the picture of the first sign of technology, that is the Ljubljana-Marsh's wheel. The first advent of technology was when wood was turned into wheel. And on the left is the Ljubljana-Marsh's wheel, which is a wooden wheel that was found in the Ljubljana Marsh, some 20 kilometers south of Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia. So radiocarbon dating has showed that it was approximately 5100 to 5350 years old. So it is that old, which makes it the oldest wooden wheel yet discovered. So that is just to show you how technology began and how it relates to science, how science and technology are correlated. Let's get a real feel of what a nanoscale actually is. So that's a nanoscale diagram, and you can see that's the nanoscale, and the size of a human being, that is around, if you consider like 5.6 feet person, so it is 10 to the power 9 nanometer approximately. Then you consider a tennis ball, which is around 6.5 centimeter, and that is around 10 to the power 8 nanometer. So that is 10 to the power 9 nanometer, that is 10 to the power 8 nanometer, and then all the way down to 10 to the power 3 nanometer, that is in the micrometer range, which is still bigger than your nanomaterials. So that is micrometer range is bacteria. So your nanoparticles are basically smaller than this bacteria also. So these are of the size range of virus, that is 100 nanometer to 10 nanometer, the size of the protein, to 1 to 2 nanometer, that is the size of the DNA. So your DNA is of the size 1 to 2 nanometer, then comes the size of the protein, that is around 10 nanometer, and then 100 nanometer, that is the size of a virus. So your nanoparticle size range basically lies in between the size range of a DNA and the size range of a virus. So it lies over here, that is you either liposomes, dendrimers, gold nanoparticles, quantum dots, fullerenes or carbon nanotubes. These are of the size range of 1 to 100 nanometer, that is the size range of this, which is smaller than bacteria and much smaller than the size of the size of a tennis ball or the size of a human being. Now you can see how small a nanoscale is, and no, it is not visible from your naked eye. You cannot see that. You can only observe it under the microscope. So that's the size of water, which is molecular level, which is which is of the length scale angstrom. So that is the size of a water molecule. So it's bigger than the water molecule and smaller than virus. That is the size range of your nanoscaled objects. This is for your better understanding. So you can see by comparing various objects how small a nanoscale is, and you can compare these objects like antibody is for around 10 nanometer, size of the water molecule, that is 0.2 nanometer, size of the DNA 2.5 nanometer, size of the virus is 150 nanometer, then size of the RBC 7000 nanometer. So can you see RBC with your eyes? No, na? That is around 7000 nanometer. So your nanometer scale is so small. Then coin is also this much, around this much big as compared to your nanoparticle. Then hair is also around this much bigger. These are bacterial cells for you, 10,000 nanometer. So you can see how small your nanomaterials are. They can easily fit into these bacterial cells inside a human cell and inside an RBC also. So that is the property, and these are the size ranges for your nanomaterials that you have synthesized. So that is the size of a graphene sheet, which is 0.7 nanometer. Then carbon nanotubes 0.7 nanometer. Then fullerenes 0.7. So that is the size range of your nanoscaled objects, which you can compare with these. So humans, that is the size of the human cell, and that is the size of your nano object. So what is so unique about the scale? The uniqueness of the scale lies in the fact that when you size down a material down to nanoscale, what happens is that its properties are going to change drastically. So what happens is that there are certain property changes which I will discuss one by one in my next slides. So first, there is a high surface to volume ratio in your nanomaterial as compared to your bulk material. Then quantum confinement effects. What are quantum confinement effects? I will be telling you, and these effects change the property of your nanomaterial drastically as compared to your bulk material. Then enhanced chemical reactivity. Enhanced chemical reactivity, which is also due to high surface to volume ratio of your nanomaterial. And then dominance of surface forces over bulk forces. Dominance of surface forces over bulk forces. So these are the things that make your nanoscale different from your bulk scale. So your nanoparticles or nanomaterials are highly reactive materials. So how does it happen? It is because they have a very high surface area to volume ratio. So how do they have a high surface area to volume ratio? It is because they are so smaller in size, and so most of the atoms, they reside in the surface than in the core. So that's the high surface area to volume ratio of your property of your nanoparticles. So you consider on the left, you see there is a cube, large cube, and you think you imagine pulling out this 1/8 part of this cube into a smaller cube, and then again you pull out this one small cube out of this 1/8 part of this, that is an even smaller cube. So that is marked as 1, 2 and 4. So that's the scale range. So you scale it down to this, and then you scale it down to this, half of this and then half of this. So that's the size of the cube. This is 1 centimeter, this is 2 centimeter, this is 4 centimeter now. And the area of the side you calculate, and the area of cube surface, and then volume you calculate. And then you calculate the ratio of surface area to volume, and what you will find is that for the 1 centimeter cube it is 6, for the 2 centimeter cube it is 3/1, and for the 4 centimeter cube it is 3/2. So you can see there's a huge size, there's a huge surface area to volume ratio difference between this cube and this cube. So smaller the size, more is the high surface area to volume ratio. So what does it imply? That there are more surface atoms, there is more surface energy, there are more reactive sites available. So that makes your nanoparticle highly reactive. What are the consequences of this high surface area to volume ratio? That there is an enhanced reactivity, that is more surface atoms is equals to more active sites. Then improved absorption. Larger surface area allows more drug absorption, and better will be the biosensing. Then strong bio-nano interactions. More is the surface area, more the surface atoms, and greater is the interaction with cells, proteins and DNA. Then altered properties, changing melting points, electrical and optical points, that we are going to discuss in the property section of our lecture. Then that's the conclusion, that changes in the surface area to volume ratio of a cube, that is smaller the cube, the higher the surface area to volume ratio, and more will be the reactivity with the surrounding environment. So what is quantum confinement? This is a very unique property of nanomaterials. So when a bulk material is broken down to a very, very small scale, that is nanoscale, it is broken down into nanoscale. What happens is that the electrons aren't free to move anymore. So this happens when the bulk material is broken down into the nanoscale. The nanoscale is so small that it is comparable to the de Broglie wavelength of that electron. So now your material size is so small that it's comparable to the de Broglie wavelength of the electron. So what happens is that your Fermi energy is still the same. From the bulk material to the nanoscaled material, your Fermi energy remains the same. So what happens is that your electron has a very high potential, but it is now locked, it is confined to a very small space. So it's like your electron is trapped or confined in a very small box, which is comparable to the particle in the box model of quantum physics. So imagine that's your nano-sized material. So electron that was very free to move till now, it's like it is getting confined in a box. That is your particle in a box model of quantum physics. Your electron is getting That's your electron. So this green colored thing, that's your electron. Your electron is now trapped or confined inside the impenetrable walls of infinite potential energy. It's like being trapped in the walls of, so it is now trapped inside the walls. These walls are impenetrable, it cannot go outside because these walls are impenetrable, and now your electron has a very high potential energy but it cannot go outside, so it is now trapped. So what happens is that this results in the discretization of the energy levels. So what happens is that the energy levels of this electron are going to be, they are going to appear in discrete, separate, discrete, distinct bands like this. Okay, so by now what was that in bulk materials? In bulk materials, the energy level was like a continuous band like this. In bulk material, the energy band was like a ramp, continuous. But what happens in nanoscale materials? Your energy levels get discrete. Okay, so these are quantized and discrete and distinct energy bands now. So that's a schematic representation of quantum confinement effects. That's an experimental picture which shows colloidal suspensions, dispersions of CDSC basically nanoparticles with different sizes under UV illumination, that is under ultraviolet illumination. You can see the different colors. So what is happening is that these are different nano sizes. That's your particle size 6 nanometer, that's your particle size 2 nanometer. So what you can see is that these are the discrete, distinct energy bands, and that's the conduction band, that's your valence band. So what happens is that as the size is decreasing from 6 nanometer to 2 nanometer, what is happening is that the energy gap, that is the band gap between the valence band and the conduction band, the energy gap between the conduction band and the valence band, that is the band gap, that goes on increasing as the size of your particle is decreasing. So your size of the particle is now decreasing and the band gap between the conduction band and valence band, the band gap is going on to increase. So what is happening is that now when light is falling on this valence band, on the electron in this valence band, what happens is that your electron gets excited and now it cannot move freely from here to here. From here it was possible for the electron to move somewhat freely, not very freely because that is also nanoscale, but now it has to jump and it requires more energy. So more the band gap, more energy will be required by your electron to jump from this valence band to your conduction band. So it's like that's light will be falling over here and your electron will be jumping from here to here, creating a positive charge over here, that is known as hole. And this hole and electron are known as, collectively known as exciton. So this hole pair and electron, they are known as exciton. So your electron is going to jump from here to here, and for jumping it will require energy. So higher the band gap, more will your electron require energy from jumping from here to here. Okay. So larger the size, lesser the energy gap and lesser energy required for the electron to jump from here to here. But as the band gap increases, more energy will be required by an electron to jump from here to here. So here for the 6 nanometer size, what is happening is that energy of say higher energy, say higher wavelength and lower energy. Okay, so here it is red in color and here it is blue in color because it is emitting blue light over here because it's required light of say higher energy and lower wavelength over here, and here like blue light, and here it required red light which is of higher wavelength and lower energy. So this appears red in color and this appears blue in color. Okay. So what energy is it needing? It is needing blue light because it requires so a higher energy light to jump from here to here. So that is a higher energy, shorter wavelength, and that is lower energy and longer wavelength. So that differentiates your color according to the size of your dots or your nanoparticles. So that's the quantum confinement effect. This is a bulk material where motion of your electron is not confined at all in any three axes. In x, y, z axis, the motion of your electron is not confined at all. It is free to move along any of the axes in bulk material. Now in quantum well, that is a two-dimensional material which is like a sheet of paper. So what is happening is that your electron is free to move in two directions, along the y-axis and along the z-axis, but not along the x-axis. That is, it is confined along the width. It cannot move through this. Then your electron inside a quantum wire, what is happening is that it is free to move along one axis, along the length, but not along two axes. That is, along the breadth and the width, it is not, it is confined. Okay. So in quantum dot, what happens is that this is a zero dimensional material where the motion of the electron is confined in all three dimensions. That is the particle in size, particle in box model. That is, it is confined in all three directions, in all the three axes. It is, the motion of this electron is confined. That is a quantum dot for you. So that's quantum confinement in a nutshell. Your bulk material having a, so when there is a size reduction, what happens is that the energy gap between conduction band and valence band goes on to decrease, and there is a discretization of your energy levels of your electron. And what is happening is that there are quantized energy states now, and there are size dependent properties. So smaller the particle, there is blue shift, which means a smaller particle means blue shift and larger particle means red shift. So smaller the particle, there is a larger band gap. Then larger the particle, there is a smaller band gap. So this is for here. Then these properties are exploited for tunable emission, for optoelectronics, bioimaging and quantum devices. Surface forces. So as you know that when a bulk material is broken down to nanoscale, what happens is that 90% of its atoms are going to reside on the surface of that material instead of the core. So instead of the core, 90% of the atoms are residing on the surface. So as you can see that a nanoscale material is having most of its atoms on the surface. So what is happening is that surface forces are going to influence that material more than the bulk forces. So consider a bulk material, a solid bulk material. What is happening is that it has the effect of gravity and inertia over it. But what happens to a nanoscaled object is that your surface forces like surface tension, like electrostatic forces, van der Waals forces, these surface forces are going to dominate on that nanoscaled object as compared to the bulk material, which is more influenced by gravity and inertial forces. So that's attractive forces, electrostatic repulsion or steric repulsion. So when repulsive forces are much greater than attractive forces, it's a well dispersed suspension. When repulsive forces are less than attractive forces, there's aggregation and sedimentation. So stabilization mechanisms of nanoparticles, force balancing of attractive forces, that is van der Waals interactions and hydrogen bonds with and without repulsion. So that's just a depiction of surface forces for a clear understanding. So that's the thing. Your bulk material to mesoparticle to nanoparticle, then there are surface forces acting on it. These are the bulk forces which act on bulk materials. These are the surface forces, surface tension, van der Waals, that dominate the nanoscale materials. Then there is a high surface to volume ratio and dominance of surface forces in your nanoparticle. Self-assembly. Now this is also a very interesting property of your nanoparticles. What happens is that natural forces at the molecular level can cause atoms and molecules to spontaneously arrange themselves into ordered complex structures similar to processes that are found in biological systems like DNA formation. So it is, this self-assembly is a very similar process that already happens in biological systems like DNA assembly. So these natural forces, they are at the molecular level, they can cause atoms and molecules to also spontaneously arrange themselves into ordered complex structures. So that's like creating order from chaos, that is self-assembly for you. So that is nucleation. Your nanoparticle is being formed, that's an intermediate step, that is nucleation, that is like a seed, and then there is aggregation, oriented attachment happening, then there is self-assembly forming a bigger crystal, and there is further growth into a proper full grown crystal. So that is the self-assembly property of nanoparticles. So what happened that in 1959, Richard Feynman's lecture, there's plenty of room at the bottom. It created waves across the world. So it was he, the famous physicist Richard Feynman, who envisioned this entire idea of nanoparticles. So he said that there's plenty of room at the bottom. So by this statement, he basically told us that this nanoscale is an underrated thing that needs to be studied. So that inspired all scientists across the world to start exploring this nanoscale phenomena. That in 1980s, what happened that there was the development of STM and AFM technology for nanoscale visualization. So now you started to visualize these nanoparticles. Then in 1990s, what happened? Emergence of nanofabrication and nanoparticle synthesis. Then in 2000, integration with biology and medicine. You started to integrate biology and medicine. You started to integrate the applications of these nanoparticles with biology and medicine. So that's the timeline of nanomaterials discovery in the modern nanotechnology era. So that is where 1857, where Michael Faraday studied the fabrication of the features of the ruby gold colloidal suspensions. So he did that accidentally. Basically, he did not know that he is creating nanoparticles. So he just realized that gold particles, when you break down, like you break bulk gold material into small particles, you crush it down, and these are very small now, but still they'll be yellow in color. But go down to the nanoscale, you create a nanomaterial out of it, a nano gold material, then what happens is that the color changes from yellow to ruby red. So he created that ruby red gold colloidal suspensions for the first time. So he realized that there was something unique about this, but he did not name it as a nanoparticle or nanotechnology yet. So he just created that accidentally. Then in 1959, the first nano talk, there's plenty of room at the bottom, by Richard Feynman, that created waves across the world, and that he envisioned the idea of nanoparticles. Then the term nanotechnology was first used by Norio Taniguchi. This scientist, in 1981, he used the term nanotechnology for the first time. So after so many years, in 1981, the term nanotechnology was first used by this scientist. Then in 1981, invention of STM. Invention of STM in 1981 to characterize your nanoparticle. Then in 1985 to 87, invention of AFM, your atomic force microscopy, and the popularization of nanotechnology by engines of creation. Then fullerene was discovered, that is 60 carbon atom nanomaterial. Your fullerene was discovered. Then Foresight Institute was founded. Then in 1990, first issue of Nanotechnology Journal was published, and then in 1991, carbon nanotube structure was elucidated for the first time. Then in 1997 to 99, nanowire circuit developed at HP, and then all this. Then in 2000, this, and I won't go into detail, and then so on and so forth. Nanoparticles have been constantly, they have been progressing. Your nanotechnology and nanoscience has been progressing since then, year by year. That's also the nanoscale, telling you of the various timelines. These are the various companies that are using nanomaterials, when were they founded and what are they doing. That's the paper clipping of this scientist who envisioned your nanoscience and nanotechnology for the first time. This was the paper, an invitation to enter a new field of physics. So since then to now, nanotechnology has made all those advances from there to here, from nanotechnology to nanobiotechnology. So biological systems, they naturally operate at nanoscale. You have your cell, which is very small, and then inside that you have DNA, that is a nanoscaled object. You have your kinesin protein, very small. They already act as a robot. They walk on the microtubule to carry cargo from inside the cell to the surface. So you already have nanoscaled objects and performing various functions. So your biological system is naturally operating at the nanoscale. So it is not new. So you can already manipulate that thing. DNA, proteins, viruses, they are the functional nanostructures that are already present in living systems. So nanotechnology, what does it do? It will enable the precise interaction with biomolecules. You want to interact very precisely with a biomolecule, which is of a very small size. You need something of that size scale. Okay. So your biomolecules are very smaller. You want to precisely interact with that. You have to put something to interact with that, which is of the very small size, either smaller than that or comparable to that size. So that has laid the foundation of nanobiotechnology. That's an AI generated image which is showing you the precise interaction with biomolecules. So these are the different modes of interaction of biomolecules with polymeric nanosphere and nanocapsules. So that's your nanosphere where biomolecules are encapsulated within the nanosphere. So you have a nanosphere and your biomolecules are being encapsulated inside this. This is a solid polymer and these are your biomolecules. Then there is a nanocapsule which has a polymer shell and has a core which is oil or water. So your biomolecules are basically encapsulated in the internal cavity of the nanocapsule. So these can be the different modes where biomolecules are interacting with your nanomaterials. So it can be a nanosphere or a nanocapsule, or in this way your biomolecules can be adsorbed on the surface of your nanoparticles. So this can also happen that your biomolecules are being adsorbed on the surface. Surface area is very high, so you can see that this happens very efficiently. Your biomolecules are getting adsorbed on the surface, which is also results in protein corona formation that I'll be telling in detail later. Then this is also the same, the biomolecules getting adsorbed on the surface of your nanoparticles. So these are different modes of interaction of biomolecules with polymeric, nanosphere or nanocapsule. That's your nanoparticle with interface linking agent. So that's your nanoparticle and it can be linked with nucleic acids, it can be functionalized with nucleic acids, carbohydrates, lipids, drugs, antibiotics and proteins. So a nanoparticle can be functionalized with that. What does functionalization means? You can attach these on the surface and it becomes functionalized with that particular agent. So it can interact very precisely with the it's like a ligand and receptor thing. You attach your ligand over here and then it will go and bind to the receptor of it. So that's functionalization for you. Or antibody antigen reaction, you functionalize your nanoparticle with an antibody and it is going to interact with that particular antigen now with its corresponding antigen. So that is surface functionalization. So these are biomolecules functionalized nanoparticles. So your nanoparticle as an interface or and there you can attach nucleic acids, carbohydrates, lipids, drugs, antibiotics and proteins, and this can happen very efficiently because of the larger surface area to volume ratio of your nanoparticles. This can happen very efficiently. That's a detailed interaction of nanoparticles with cellular interface. So what is happening inside a cell at the cell membrane? What is happening is that is nanoparticle protein corona formation that is presented to the cells. So here your nanoparticle is trying to enter this. So what will happen is that these are the actin filaments. So it will enter via phagocytosis or macropinocytosis, that is inside the vesicle. So it is encapsulating it like this, or caveolin dependent endocytosis or clathrin dependent endocytosis or clathrin and caveolin independent endocytosis. So all these are methods of your interaction of nanoparticles with the cellular interface. So nanoparticles interact with cells via the protein corona. How is it doing that? By formation of protein corona, your nanoparticle is interacting with the cell. So A shows uptake of large size nanoparticle protein complexes. Agglomerates of nanoparticle may be ingested by specialized cells such as macrophages and neutrophils via phagocytosis, and then macropinocytosis, which means non-specific uptake of extracellular fluid containing aggregates of nanoparticles may also be taken up by cells via macropinocytosis, which involves ruffling of the plasma membrane to form vesicles which ultimately fuse to form lysosomes. Okay. Then endocytosis may also be directed by specific receptors involving formation of either caveolae that are plasma membrane indentions consisting of cholesterol binding proteins called caveolins or clathrin coated vesicles, D or E, apart from these other endocytic mechanisms like which are independent of clathrin or caveolae and can also facilitate the uptake of nanoparticles. So what are the type of nanoscale materials? These can be nanoparticles, nanotubes and nanowires, quantum dots or nanostructured surfaces and thin films. That's the vertical confinement and that's the lateral confinement. So you can see that's the size difference from 1 to micrometer to 1 angstrom, and these are the dots. Then 2D clusters, 1D wires, molecules and atoms, that's the size range, and that's the bulk, multilayers and monolayers, that is the vertical confinement. That is the nanomaterials classification based on dimensionality. That is 0-dimensional nanomaterials, 1-dimensional nanomaterials, 2-dimensional nanomaterials, and 3-dimensional nanomaterials. So these are nanospheres or clusters in this. In this category, there are nanospheres and nanoclusters. Quantum dots, fullerenes, and gold nanoparticles. These are all 0-dimensional nanomaterials, nanoparticles. So what is happening is that here the electrons are confined in all the 3 directions. So these are 0-dimensional. They cannot move in any dimension now. So it is, your electron is confined to basically it is 0-dimensional. So it is confined in all directions. So now these are quantum dots, fullerenes, and gold nanoparticles. Then 1-dimensional nanotubes, wires, or rods. So these are metal nanorods, ceramic crystals, carbon nanotubes, metallic nanotubes, or gold nanowires, polymeric nanofibers, and self-assembled structures. Then 2D, thin films, plates, and layered structures. So these are carbon-coated nanoplates in this, or graphene sheets, or layered nanomaterials. So you can see that your electron is free to move in 2 dimensions and not in 1 dimension, it is confined. So these are 2-dimensional materials. That is 1-dimensional materials, electron is free to move along the line, but it is confined in 2 dimensions. So that is 1-dimensional nanomaterial. That is 3-dimensional nanomaterial, where bulk nanomaterials or polycrystals are formed. Your electron can move freely in all 3 axes, and these are basically assembled things of, these are assembled out of nanomaterials. So these are 3-dimensional nanomaterials. These are the nanoscale building blocks. So what is the significance of nanoscale materials? They have tailorable optical, electrical, and magnetic properties. So as you can see, they have very unique properties that is very different from the bulk scale. So what is happening is that these unique properties can be tailored according to the applications that you want to use them for. So they have tailorable optical, electrical, and magnetic properties. Then they have a very enhanced sensitivity, which can be useful for sensing applications and as well as for catalysis. So they have enhanced sensitivity, and it is also very significant. Then improved mechanical and catalytic performance, and then ability to interfere with biological systems. So their interaction with biological systems I've already told you about. So these are all the significance of nanoscale materials that have led to various applications. So that's just an AI generated image that is showing you tailorable properties, that is these, then enhanced sensitivity, then ability to interfere with biological systems, and then improved mechanical and catalytic performance. So they are being used as biosensors for catalysis and nanomedicine. So that is that. Why nanomaterials are different? So what happens is that is bulk material, the same material from bulk to nanoparticles. When you see that you break down the same material to the nanoscale, what happens is that the shape and the sizes, they start to vary very drastically. So what happens is that the shape and sizes, they are very different from the bulk. Then optical properties, they also differ from bulk. So let's say if this is your bulk material, which is of gold and silver color, and then you break it down into smaller nanoparticles, and then what happens is that even in the nanoscale range, that is your 5.5 nanometer and that is your 2.3 nanometer. So this one is blue in color, this one is red in color. So that is how drastically your optical properties change when you break down a material from bulk to nanoscale. Then electronic properties, like I already told you about quantum confinement and surface effects. What happened is that is your quantum dots. What happens is that your energy levels are getting discrete and quantized, and there's a higher band gap between there's a higher energy gap between your conduction band and valence band, and now smaller the particle, more will be the band gap, and more energy will your electron be requiring for it to jump from valence band to conduction band. It cannot move freely, now it has to jump from the valence band to conduction band. So more the gap, more the energy it will be requiring, more energy light it will be using, that is blue light, which is higher energy, lower wavelength, and then that is red light for you, that is of the lower energy and higher wavelength. So that's the quantum dots for you and electronic properties, and also this is also correlated with the optical properties. Then magnetic properties, this I'll be discussing in detail in my next lecture. So that corresponds to the hysteresis loop and super paramagnetism. What happens is that for the same bulk material, when you consider the smaller nanoscale material, what happens is that there are so many bulk materials that are non-magnetic when they are on the bulk scale, but when you break them down into nanoscale, size, then what happens is that they start to show magnetic properties, and they also show super paramagnetism, where what happens is that there is a where you apply a magnetic field and switch it off, and there is no magnetic remnants in that. So there is no remaining magnetism, and your magnetic field basically flips instantly. So that is a super paramagnetism that I will be discussing in detail in the magnetic property section. Then mechanical, that's your diamond which is very hard and brittle, and that's your diamond nano needle. That's a diamond nano needle. So now this is flexible. So that's a hard and brittle material, and when you consider nanoscaled diamond, what is it? It is now flexible and soft. It is now flexible and soft, it can bend easily. So you can use this for biomedical properties. So it is less brittle and more softer. That's just telling you that that's the size of the bulk, that's the shape of the bulk gold, and then it can be converted to nanosphere, nanoshell, nanorod, nanocluster, nanocages or nanostars. So there can be various shapes and sizes of the same bulk material when broken down to nanoscale. When sized down to nanoscale, these can be of various shapes and sizes, and accordingly their properties are going to differ. So let's discuss examples of some remarkable nanoscale phenomena, and let's start with quantum dots. So QDs that are used in TVs. So these semiconductor nanocrystals that are used in modern TV displays and solar cells, these are quantum dots. Their color of light emission can be precisely tuned by changing their size due to quantum confinement, leading to vibrant energy and energy efficient displays. So as I've already told you about quantum dots, the quantum confinement effects that they undergo. So what happens is that the light color can be precisely tuned, their color of light that they emit, it can be precisely tuned just by changing their size and shape, and which leads to vibrant and energy efficient displays. So you can compare a liquid crystal display television screen using a quantum dot enhancement film, that is on the left, and a standard one. So that's your standard one, your standard TV screen, and that's your quantum dot screen. So you can see the vibrant red color. You can see the vibrant red color in this and vibrant green color. So you can see some vibrant colors popping out. So that is the difference between, you can, if you see this closely, you can see the difference in color. So that is the comparison between a liquid crystal display TV that uses a quantum dot enhancement film. So here there is a quantum dot enhancement film. You have an enhancement film attached to this, and this is your standard TV. So these are applications of quantum dots in TVs. So these semiconductor nanocrystals used in modern TV displays and solar cells, the color of light emission, it can be precisely tuned by changing their size, leading to vibrant and energy efficient displays. So that's your quantum dots. Then self-cleaning surfaces. As I've already explained in my first slide, the nanoscale films and coatings on windows and textiles, they can create a super hydrophobic water repellent effect, mimicking the natural phenomena like the lotus leaf. So your lotus leaf phenomena that I've already discussed before, what it has inspired self-cleaning surfaces. So nanoscale films and coatings on windows and textiles have been created that are super hydrophobic, that repel water instantly, and they mimic the natural phenomena like the lotus effect. So water droplets, what do? They roll off, picking up dirt and dust in the process. So what happens is that water is not going to stick on the surface. There will be some air packets because of some nano crystals on the surface. So what will happen is that because of nanoparticles on the surface, your air pockets will be there, and that will make a super hydrophobic effect, and your water is going to repel from the surface, and it will roll off along with the dirt, cleaning off your surface and also not making it wet. So that is the self-cleaning surfaces which are now inspired from the lotus effect. So let's discuss gecko adhesion. So you know what a gecko is. It is a reptile, and it can walk upside down on ceilings, and it can do so because it has millions of nanoscale hair-like setae on their feet. So they have millions of nanostructures. These are hair-like setae that are present on their feet, millions of nanostructures. So they have it on their feet, and what happens is that these structures are generating a significant van der Waals forces, a weak intermolecular force that becomes significant at the nanoscale. So what happens is that van der Waals forces that are in generally weak forces, they at this nanoscale are being dominant, so dominant that they are being able to overcome gravity also. So what is happening is that a large sized object, it is going to experience gravity. So, but still it is able to stick on the surface of your ceiling. It is because they have some millions of nanostructures, they have a high surface area. So, there on the nanoscale, your van der Waals forces are dominating so well that they are providing a powerful adhesion, even overcoming gravity. That's your gecko lizard. These are mesostructures, these are microstructures, and these are your nanostructures. These are your setae. You can see these are your setae, hair-like structures present on their feet. So, these are the structures that generate significant van der Waals forces. They have a high surface area. There are so millions of nanostructures that are present on the feet of this gecko. There are millions of the structures that are present on the feet of the gecko. These generate significant van der Waals forces, which is otherwise a weak intermolecular force, but then at this scale it is becoming so significant that it is overcoming gravity and providing a powerful adhesion to this gecko, and it can stick upside down on the ceiling. So it can stick upside down on the ceiling, even defying gravity. So super paramagnetism. So materials that are non-magnetic in bulk like gold or platinum, they can become magnetic at nanoscale. So what happens is that magnetic nanoparticles can be single domain exhibiting super paramagnetism, which is used in high contrast MRI scans. So that is super paramagnetism. So that is magnetization. Here's a magnet. So there are magnetic nanoparticles in this. You put a magnet and this actually happens. That's an experimental image. So what is happening is that all the nanoparticle, it is coming over here because of the magnet. So and you shake it down and it goes back to this. You remove the magnet and you shake it and it goes back to this. So that is the magnetic property. So materials that are non-magnetic in bulk. So some materials are in bulk, they don't show magnetic properties, but they become magnetic at the nanoscale, and they also show super paramagnetism. That is, they do not retain their magnetic property. When you remove the magnetic field, they instantly lose that magnetism, and you apply the magnetic field in some other direction, they instantly gain magnetism in that direction. So that is super paramagnetism, which has various applications in creating super magnets. Then there's melting point depression. That is the melting point of a material like gold. It can drop by hundreds of degrees when it is reduced to 5 to 10 nanometers, because a high percentage of atoms are on the surface and have fewer neighbors to bond with. So I've already told you this, that the melting point of a material, it can drop by hundreds of degrees when it is reduced to 5 to 10 nanometers. This happens because a high percentage of atoms are on the surface and have a fewer neighbors to bond with. So that is how a melting point decreases along with the size, and it does so very drastically. It drops very drastically. So these are iridescent butterflies, the vibrant, very beautiful butterflies. These appear very vibrant in color. So what happens is that these are not colors. The vibrant angle dependent colors of morpho butterflies, they appear colored due to the complex hundreds of nanometers wide nanostructures on their wing scales, and these are not pigments. So these colored structures are not pigments on the surface of these butterflies. It is because of the complex hundreds of nanometers wide nanostructures that are present on the wing scales. So that is the wing scale. This image shows the butterfly, and that is the wing scale, and then zoom to that. These are the lamellae. So these are the nanostructures that are present inside this butterfly, and because of these complex structures, and it reflects light differently, and so it appears so vibrant in color. And these are not pigments, these are nanostructures. Opal, this mineral exhibits iridescence because of its natural ordered nanostructure. So you have not painted it like this. They have some inherent nanostructures. There are some ordered nanostructures inside the stone that makes it appear so vibrant and colored. So this is not a painted structure. This is just a naturally ordered nanostructure. And these vibrant colors are because of different reflection of light because of the nanostructures inside them. The chameleon's nanocrystals. So what have you seen this reptile chameleon which changes color? So that's also a very commonly used phrase, like somebody is changing colors. So you say chameleons, these possess specialized skin cells. These are called as iridophores, and these contain guanine nanocrystals. So these are not actually changing colors. These have yellow pigments, but these do not have any green pigments. So, but still, what happens is that in relaxed state, that is A, where it is in the relaxed state, and then the image B where it is in the excited state. So when it is fighting with someone, or when it is fighting with another lizard, or it is or for mating purpose, when this chameleon is excited, what happens is that the guanine nanocrystals that are present in the iridophores, they change their spacing. So they actively tune the spacing between these nanocrystals. So as they get relaxed and excited, they actively tune the spacing between these nanocrystals. So you can see the space between these nanocrystals, and in this state the space increases between these nanocrystals. So what happens is that the light is reflected differently from these surfaces accordingly. So what happens is that chameleons, these possess specialized skin cells, these are called as iridophores, and that contain guanine nanocrystals. They change color not by moving pigments as were previously thought, but they do so by actively tuning the spacing between these nanocrystals inside the skin of this in this lizard. And what happens is that it is changing the spacing between these crystals, and what is happening is that light is reflected differently and it is appearing to be of different color, and it is not of these are not pigment cells, these are just appearing to be of different color because of different light reflection. So what is the scope of nanoscience and nanotechnology in medicine? For diagnostics, drug delivery and imaging, these are widely being used and they are still being explored for various new applications. And then for nanoelectronics and data storage, then in energy, solar cells, batteries and catalysts, then in environment, water purification and remediation. Impact on biology in medicine. So molecular level detection and diagnostics has been made possible because of the discovery of nanoparticles, and nanotechnology has come a long way from the first time when it was envisioned to this date. Nanotechnology has created a revolution. So molecular level detection and diagnostics for targeted and controlled drug delivery. So I've already told you about these things, the targeted and controlled drug delivery, how is it possible. Then biosensors and bioimaging platforms, because of the fluorophores, these can be very precisely used for the biosensing and bioimaging platforms. And then understanding and mimicking biological processes, these are very important. These nanoparticles have basically created a better understanding by mimicking the biological processes. Concluding the lecture, so nanoscience explains the size dependent phenomena. You break down a bulk material to a smaller scale and the properties, they start to change, they start to shift drastically, and these properties as they change, they can be used for various applications. Then nanotechnology, it translates knowledge to applications. What does nanotechnology mean? It translates knowledge to applications. It's a bridge between your knowledge to applications. Then nanoscale materials are central to future technologies. So future is of nanotechnology as was envisioned by Richard Feynman back in 1959. So nanotechnology has come a long way from there to here, and nanoscaled objects are constantly being discovered, although it's not so talked about, but we are already using nanoscale materials, and a lot of revolution is happening on that scale. So nanobiotechnology, it represents a powerful convergence of disciplines. So it is not just limited to one discipline now, it is not just related to physics, it is completely interdisciplinary now. We are talking about nanobiotechnology, and it is connecting a lot of subjects together, it is bringing all the science together, because as we talk about quantum phenomena, the basic physics is challenged and you integrate a lot into it. So now nanobiotechnology, it represents a powerful convergence of disciplines. So thank you.
स्वयं आपको ये प्लेटफॉर्म देता है कि आप कहीं से भी एक्चुअली आप एजुकेशन प्राप्त कर सकते हैं। स्वयं में बहुत ही अच्छे टीचर्स हैं, जैसे कि दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी से हैं, BHU से हैं, JNU से हैं। तो एक प्लेटफॉर्म पे इतने सारे टीचर्स का एक साथ होना ये आपके लिए एक्चुअली बेनिफिशियली है, क्योंकि आपकी एजुकेशन एनहांस ही हो रही है, इसमें कहीं पे भी रुकावट नहीं आ रही है। मैं पढ़ा रही हूँ पॉलिटिकल लीडरशिप एंड कम्युनिकेशन, ये स्किल एनहांसमेंट कोर्स है। इन दिस यू विल लर्न अबाउट लीडरशिप ट्रेट्स। मैं इसीलिए जुड़ी थी क्योंकि मैं एक पर्टिकुलर यूनिवर्सिटी में कुछ ही पर्टिकुलर बच्चों को पढ़ाती हूँ, लेकिन जब मैं स्वयं प्रभा से जुड़ी तो मुझे ये पता है कि आई कैन बेसिकली एजुकेट मास पीपल अक्रॉस इंडिया।